you need thoughtfully with context.
Be part of the conversation
on CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. After nearly 4 decades of March Madness, this sports broadcasting legend is stepping away from his role in covering the NCAA basketball tournament. Jim Nantz on his fondest memories and what's next when we go person to person.
Competition breeds strength. I think we need more debate in our party, not just about the who. We obsess over the who. We need to talk about the what and the why.
People that are talking about pardoning him right now, when the case hasn't even started, is insane to me.
I agree with his comment. I think Xi Jinping is a dictator. But in any event, the Chinese took offense at it.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. The crowded 2024 Republican field grew again, with former Texas Congressman Will Hurd now jumping into the race.
I want to let everybody know that this morning I filed to be the Republican nominee for President of the United States.
During his announcement on CBS Mornings, Hurd also said he wants the Republican Party to talk about the future, not the past. Meanwhile, it was revealed 2 family members helped New York Republican Congressman George Santos post his bail. He fought to keep their identities a secret. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now. Nicole, thank you so much for being here. You actually caught Congressman Santos today on Capitol Hill and asked him about this. What did you learn?
Yeah, that's right. Well, of course, we have now learned that the individuals who guaranteed his bond, his $500,000 bond following that 13-count criminal indictment, were his aunt and his father. And so I asked him more about their involvement. Take a listen.
Tell me more about why your aunt and your father put up your bail.
They're my family. If anything ever happened to you, wouldn't your family come to your aid?
Do they have money?
I beg your pardon? Don't you think that's a little invasive?
Well, my understanding is your dad is a construction.
That's exactly the reason that I chose to keep their identity secure. My dad's an honest working man.
Now, Santos's father is a painter. His aunt works for the U.S. Postal Service. Santos told me that he has spoken to both of them since their names have been unsealed. And what he said that they told him is that, look, let's see how this goes. But he acknowledged that they are concerned. And he said he's particularly concerned that especially folks in the media may try to go after them. And that is why he and his attorney had argued for keeping their names and their identities under wraps. That being said, keep in mind that there is an ongoing House ethics investigation that is ongoing that is also interested in some of this information. Santos told me that he believes that, the committee has known for a while now that his family members were involved in helping to guarantee his bail and isn't concerned. But the panel did issue quite an interesting statement earlier today saying that they are working to resolve this matter expeditiously. Of course, the Ethics Committee also looking into a number of other allegations against Santos, ranging from potential, campaign misconduct, sexual misconduct, and other allegations. So that investigation, separate from this issue involving the bail, remains ongoing.
Nicole, shifting gears, you also spoke today with Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, who was on Capitol Hill. What did he have to say about the state of the race?
Yeah, that's right. Well, he was on the Hill in part to speak with House Republicans, a small group of House Republicans, but he also was here for the visit of Indian Prime Minister Modi, who is addressing Congress this evening. But we did have an opportunity to talk about the 2024 field, especially now that there is a new entrant into the race, Will Hurd. Here's his reaction to his announcement.
I think the more the merrier. My view is competition breeds strength. I think we need more debate in our party. Not just about the who. We obsess over the who. We need to talk about the what and the why. What do we stand for? Why do we stand for it? I think our base, I've traveled this country, is hungry for an outsider, somebody who's not a professional politician. I think there is a hunger for a new generation.
I mean, do you feel the field, though, is getting too large at this point?
I don't think so.
And now, of course, in terms of Vivek Ramaswamy, I did also ask him more specifically, not only about comments from Will Hurd, who earlier today on CBS Morning said that he feels that some of the GOP candidates are afraid of the former president, but you also have Chris Christie this week, who has suggested that some of his fellow Republican contenders aren't being tough enough on the former president, aren't willing to go after him, which is something, of course, we have seen Chris Christie do. So I asked Vivek his response to that.
And my message to Chris Christie is this. His criticism of Donald Trump includes the fact that Trump runs on vengeance and grievance. Well, I think it's no better if you're running on vengeance and grievance of your own against an individual either. And for me, I'm done obsessing over the who. I want to move forward as a country.
And now he told me that he feels that he will be able to hold his own in this race, particularly as we get closer to the upcoming debate later this summer. He said that that will be critical because, of course, keep in mind, the former president still has quite a commanding lead over all of his rivals. And so that is not dissuading Vivek at this point from staying in the race, even though he acknowledged to me that he feels that some of these candidates could eventually drop out.
Seems like Mr. Ramaswamy certainly wants to be on that debate stage in August in Milwaukee. Nicole Killian, thank you so much for your reporting. We appreciate it. Now, to discuss the latest on the Republican presidential field, CBS News political reporter Aaron Navarro joins us. Aaron, let's begin with the entry of Will Hurd, the former Texas congressman, and let's listen for a moment to what he had to say today on CBS Mornings.
No, I would not pardon him. And people that are talking about pardoning him right now, when the case hasn't even started, is insane to me. And here is why this is frustrating to me. Donald Trump knew the kinds of information that he had. And when you look at the classifications of these documents, these are information that, if it got in the wrong hands, would lead to a loss of life.
Aaron, Congressman Hurd is not in the mold of Vivek Ramaswamy, who has been casting himself as a supporter in the sense of former President Trump, even though he's running for the nomination himself. Right. Hurd is much more of a Trump critic, though not his whole campaign is not encompassed by that value. How do people inside of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' circle, his donors, his allies, see the entry of Congressman Hurd? You cover DeSantis day in, day out. Do they see the entry of Hurd and potentially others in the coming months as any kind of reflection on DeSantis and his own strength in the race?
Well, certainly rival campaigns and staffers for those campaigns point to Burgum, Hurd, Chris Christie jumping in saying it shows that Ron DeSantis has not locked up that Trump alternative, that it shows that his candidacy is a bit weaker than maybe it seemed at the start. But DeSantis was actually asked today at the town hall in South Carolina, what do you think about all these candidates jumping in? And he downplayed it. He said, I'm focused on winning. That's kind of your job, speaking to the voters here, to help me get there. Others can do what they want, but I'm focused on winning. And that's kind of been the response every time I talk to his campaign about other candidates. Their focus for him, for his allies, for his campaign is Donald Trump and kind of getting up to him, catching up to him in the polls and getting that nomination.
Let's hear a little bit more about what the Florida governor had to say today.
Now, all of a sudden, his tune is changing. And I would just tell people, do you find it credible? Do you honestly find it credible? Would you have rather been in New York during COVID under Cuomo regime, or would you rather have been in the free state of Florida?
So he's making these attacks on Trump's policy record, but Trump might not show up to the first debate in Milwaukee. So what's the DeSantis plan for the rest of the summer?
Well, it's going to be laying out some policy proposals, kind of showing what he would like to do for the country instead of, kind of touting the highlight reel of conservative bills he passed in Florida. It's making these visits not only to the first 4 primary states, but looking through Super Tuesday. The PAC for DeSantis is looking to play out this race as much as they can, and they're looking past those 4 states, trying to build the infrastructure, looking at a primary matchup with Donald Trump that will extend past, that could, lay some support in these very heavy Trump states that, once you get past those 4 states, will help DeSantis get the nomination.
In the final minute here, what are you watching? I mean, you're covering DeSantis all the time. We're not paying attention to every move he makes like you. So what should we be paying attention to that's on your radar?
I'm watching how he interacts with voters and how voters interact with him.
Is he comfortable with voters? Does he like it?
Today was interesting because it was a town hall in South Carolina where he spent nearly half an hour, 45 minutes, just taking questions from the audience. And to me, covering some of his campaign events, that was kind of the first prolonged time that we've seen DeSantis kind of on his heels get asked questions on policy from voters.
What was the toughest question for him?
The toughest question was probably, what do you think of all these candidates jumping in? A lot of the people that were in that crowd just asked him about things he talks about, wokeness and the military, the Ukraine and Russia.
That's his view of it.
Right. I mean, another tough question was on Ukraine, which, he's faltered in the past, but he seemed to hold his own today.
Aaron Navarro, always on the beat. Thank you so much for stopping by. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
New CBS News polling shows divisions in what Democrats and Republicans think about each of their parties and how they're approaching the issue of abortion. 1 year after the overturn of Roe v. Wade, 53% of Democrats say their party isn't doing enough to protect abortion access, compared to 32% who say it's taking the right approach. Meanwhile, a majority of Republicans agree with how their party is approaching the issue, and 25% say it's not doing enough to restrict access. And next, we speak with former Trump administration National Security Advisor John Bolton, who has called on his former boss to withdraw from the 2024 race over his handling of classified documents. You're streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
It's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery lamps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
people are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether,
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
I expect to be meeting with President Xi sometime in the future, in the near term, and I don't think it's had any real consequence.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was President Biden earlier today defending his comment at a fundraiser where he referred to China's President Xi as a dictator. Just after Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Beijing, comments that sparked a rebuke from the Chinese. And joining us now is Ambassador John Bolton, who served in the Trump administration as National Security Advisor and in George W. Bush's administration as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, one of many posts he has had throughout his career. And you have paid close attention to foreign policy for decades now. Ambassador, what's your assessment of Secretary Blinken's recent trip to China and President Biden's recent comment that Xi is a dictator in his view?
Well, I think there was a lot less to Blinken's visit than met the eye. I think it accomplished its main objectives. And I think, in a sense, when you go begging to talk to a foreign government, particularly one as authoritarian as China, that it gives the wrong impression, that we are the ones who are needy. We're the ones who need the conversation. And whatever papering over differences the Blinken trip may have accomplished, President Biden blew it away the next day. I have to say, I agree with his comment. I think Xi Jinping is a dictator. It was interesting, I think, that he said Xi didn't know about the famous Chinese balloon. I have my doubts about that. It'd be hard to believe he didn't at least know about the program. But in any event, the Chinese took offense at it. And there's something to be said here for Americans to understand. When people are so sensitive about these things and make such an issue out of it, they are exalting process over substance, and we shouldn't play that game.
Let's turn to former President Donald Trump. You served in his administration. You've seen up close how he handles classified materials. You briefed him on classified material frequently inside the Oval Office as National Security Advisor. What was he like when you would give him a piece of classified material? Would he put it in his pocket? Would he bring it back to the residence, or would he give it back to you?
You know, it would depend on the circumstances. Many times he had classified information in briefing papers that were provided to him or would be presented to him in the Situation Room. Sometimes he was interested in it. If it was a lot of heavy reading, he was usually not interested in it. There were pictures, graphs, charts that reflected classified information. That seemed to get his attention. But there was no particular pattern that I discerned. I was not surprised when the reports came out of having over 300 classified documents, because I think he could have collected them over the course of 4 years in a very haphazard way. And there might have been more documents that we don't know about that were destroyed at some point.
Former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said on CBS Mornings that she can't say whether she would back Trump or not. She wants to avoid talk of politics. Is this a time for choosing, to use an old Reagan phrase, for the Republican Party on Trump? Can anyone sit on the sidelines?
I think with the evidence of everything that's happened since he first entered the race for the 2016 nomination, that you have to make a choice. I would not vote for Trump in 2024. I didn't vote for him in 2020. I did in 2016. By the time I left the White House, I was convinced he was not fit to be president. I want to say this is not a question about his personality or some of his personal attributes. This is a question of somebody who didn't know much about the federal government when he entered the job, didn't know much more when he left, didn't care to know much, didn't appreciate the gravity of some of the issues he dealt with. COVID was a great tragedy for the United States. We could have faced far graver crises. Thank God we didn't. I think it's a danger for the United States if he gets a second term.
Are you cooperating with the government in any way on the documents investigation as someone who had served alongside him and knows how he operates?
I'm not. I've not been contacted by any of those investigators.
What about the January 6th investigation? How seriously do you think that could be for Trump?
Well, I think from what I've heard in conversations around the country, these investigations are very wide-ranging. It's not just the actual events of January the 6th. And, you know, we don't know what evidence the prosecutors have. I think a lot of people think if we don't know about the evidence, they must not have it. To me, it's an example of the Justice Department doing a good job in keeping things confidential. So on that basis, I don't think anybody can predict whether there's a potential prosecution there.
Trump is the front runner for the nomination. He's someone you served with but now oppose politically and on policy grounds in terms of how he handles a lot of different issues. Are you still considering your own run for the Republican nomination?
Well, I'm still considering it because I think it's important to remain on the edge of the water, a potential entrant into the race, both with respect to emphasizing national security issues, which I don't think we debate nearly enough for citizens to have a clear understanding what it means when they vote for a president. There's a lot at stake in the international field. We face a lot of threats and dangers. Our politicians almost never talk enough about national security. I certainly would if I got in. And second, I think it's important to defeat Trump. And I think that means a responsible potential candidate has to weigh the risk of confusing things even further than they are by having too many candidates versus whether the case against Trump can be made effectively. I think it's critical for the Republican Party to reject Trump as the nominee. I don't think he will be defeated in politics by Democrats, by a hostile media, by law enforcement. I think he needs to be defeated by Republicans.
Former Ambassador John Bolton, former National Security Advisor, always an ambassador once you become an ambassador. We appreciate you stopping by CBS, America Decides, and having a conversation. Thank you.
Glad to be with you.
Other Republicans in the 2024 mix are in Washington looking to gain support from religious voters. And next, we speak to the chair of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job?
I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Welcome back to America Decides. Several 2024 hopefuls will appear at the Faith and Freedom Coalition's annual gathering in Washington. The chair of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Ralph Reed, joins us now. Ralph, thanks for being here at the table. So this is a regular occurrence for you over the past decade or so. You're convening the candidates. They're all coming, and they want to appeal to religious voters. Is this all about Trump, or do you think there's actually some political oxygen out there among this coalition to hear out some alternatives?
You know, I think both are true at once. I think Donald Trump is one of the most formidable, if not the strongest frontrunner at this point in the process that I've seen in my career. And I worked for George W. Bush in '99 and 2000, so I know a little bit about that. And he's in a very, very strong position. And he should be, because he's the first former president to seek his party's presidential nomination since Teddy Roosevelt did it 110 years ago. So this is pretty historic. But there's a corollary truth and reality that is somewhat contradictory, and that is this is going to be a highly fluid process. It's going to be very competitive, very hard fought. I think Ron DeSantis at a minimum, and probably Tim Scott, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, maybe potentially several others are going to be well-funded enough and have appealing candidacies that will make them a factor in those early primary states. And if somebody were able to break off right tackle and win one of those first 3 states, this race would change overnight.
Well, a lot of the attention's on Iowa, because if you're going to win over religious voters and eat into Trump's base, you have to do it in Iowa versus South Carolina's a little bit later in the calendar. There's been a lot of talk, you've heard it, from people like former Vice President Mike Pence, Trump's own former VP, who says that Trump's not conservative enough on abortion. Is this a real criticism of Trump that's gaining traction on the right?
I think it's certainly going to be litigated in the course of the campaign. You know, Mike Pence has staked out a position in favor of a pain-capable federal bill that would ban abortion at 15 weeks. We support that. That's our position. Donald Trump hasn't committed to that. I don't think Ron DeSantis is committed to that. So it's going to be litigated. It's going to be talked about. But I think Trump is going to have a case to make, too. You know, I mean, he's the one who appointed the 3 Supreme Court justices, and Roe v. Wade was overturned because of his actions. He was the most pro-life president in history. He defunded Planned Parenthood. He was the first president to speak to the March for Life. And, you know, Trump is not known to be a shrinking violet. So I think if they come back to him, if they attack him on that, I think he'll come back very forcefully. And then it'll be up to the voters to decide. But I'm glad we're going to have that conversation because, honestly, Bob, since the Dobbs decision, I don't think the Republican Party, its campaigns, or its candidates have quite found their sea legs yet. I think they're still trying to figure out the message.
Well, they almost seemed like they were in shock when it happened. And a year later, when I talked to campaigns across the board, right, left, or center inside the GOP, they still seem to be adjusting to this.
I agree. Yeah, and I think, I don't know why it caught them so flat-footed, and I think they mistakenly thought if we could just talk about inflation and gas prices and pretend that that didn't happen. I mean, abortion in a lot of these battleground states was right at the number 1 or 2 issue and why voters were voting the way they were. You cannot stick your head in the sand and ignore this. You've got to not only explain your own position and do it confidently and assertively, you've got to pivot to offense and start attacking the Democrats for being the extremists that they are. They want to codify Roe v. Wade into federal law. They want to create a new federal entitlement under Medicaid, repeal the Hyde Amendment, and that would lead to 300,000 abortions a year beyond what we have now. That's an indefensible position.
Is the enthusiasm still there among the voters you have been such a big part of for really 3-4 decades now? They've overturned, the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade. For many conservative voters who are religious, they got what they wanted. Do they still want to show up and have that same fervor on religious issues at the polls?
Yeah, absolutely, because what they discovered was that the Dobbs decision was not a moment of triumphalism. It was not the final victory. It was an intermediate victory that basically gave them a license to go state by state and pass as many laws as they could to protect as many unborn children as they could. So they found out rather quickly, by the way, just like the left did after Roe, that this was not the court making a decision did not end the discussion.
It goes to the states.
It just started it.
Then the state Supreme Courts.
That's right. And then what I believe is that if you look, 24 states, either just prior to Dobbs or afterwards, have now passed laws protecting unborn children in their mother's wombs. Some at 12 weeks, some at 6 weeks, some from conception. It's a mix of things, but 24 states have already acted. We believe that by the time we get to the presidential election in 24, that number is going to be 30 to 32 states. If we can get enough states acting, it will create a national consensus, and then we can act at the federal level.
Some Democrats welcome what you're doing. They're saying you're going too far for the country.
Well, that's not backed up by the data. 60 to 70% of the American people think that there shouldn't be abortion after the first trimester.
The debate will continue certainly in the next year ahead of the election. Ralph Reed will be covering your event. Thanks for stopping by. We appreciate it.
You bet.
And that does it for today. You can stream our program Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just